Hello and welcome back to the podcast. So today we've got a fascinating guest. So Joey Cheek is also a Greensboro native, just like me, but he's maybe a little bit more impressive than I am. I mean, he's a Olympic gold medalist in speed skating. So we're going to dig into sports data, specifically sports data kind of in the 2000s era, and how data has kind of shifted over time. And then we're also going to talk about data in the consulting space and in the startup space. And also kind of the bedrock of this conversation is going to be around how to be an effective analyst or an effective employee. So without further ado, let's go ahead and pull Joey on. Joey, how's it going?
Hey, John David, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, because it's interesting because you're kind of like a new player in the scene. Because how long have you been the executive vice president of the chamber?
I'm close to a year. I guess I'm at like 10 and a half months or so as executive vice president of entrepreneurship. Yeah. Helping build startups here in Greensboro.
Because I went through Launch Lab, which is that like the flagship?
Yeah. How long? Did you do a 14-week program or was it shorter?
Man, it was back in like 2018, 2019. So okay. It was, I want to say
more than a weekend.
Yeah, it was like 14 weeks, I think.
Yeah, that's our flagship. So we call that growth. We have three products. We have a weekend kind of boot camp. So you come to us and you come with an idea, you leave with a business, we say. We've got a 5-week, we've turned it into a masterclass. Back when you did your programming, we had a 5-week program called 101, and it was just like snippets of business. Mm-hmm. But what we found is people weren't getting a good use of it. People going through it didn't get enough info. And the staff, we were working really hard to put this thing together. And so it wasn't that effective, and we worked really hard. And so we changed 101 from a one little slice of a couple business pieces to like a deep dive on something. So we just finished our first deep dive on digital marketing, but we'll have to do a data one because this is so valuable that, we'll have to bring you in and have you speak to our cohort.
Well, because you and I were talking last week about potentially spinning up like a data lab.
Yeah, that's right.
Where companies get to come in, because that's my whole teaching philosophy is, well, number one, I'm as lazy as possible. So I just set it up, I bring the students in, and then I find a business. So this semester, the students are going to be working with the YMCA, and all I have to do is just kind of have this big digital footprint like I do, and opportunities come to me, and I just kind of kick it off to my students. And it's funny because the students are nurturing my network, but then they're also, that's such a better story to tell is I studied social media marketing data for the YMCA and we found this insight, for example.
Yeah.
Versus, I got an A+ or a 96 on my analytics exam.
Totally. I mean, the whole reason you take the class is to be able to affect change in the real world. So,
right.
You've been in the real world, right? Like, when was the last time someone looked at your grades? They don't. But maybe your first job, right? But if you have a portfolio, if you have examples, if you can talk in an interview about the impact you've had, you're 90% ahead of the rest of the world at that point. Although we're like jumping, we're all over the place. We're already diving in. So this is time.
This is my plan. There is no plan.
Good. Yeah, it's jazz.
But because one thing that I kind of wanted to root down on is I feel like you're being tough. I got a huge amount of value out of the Launch Lab 101 series. The biggest benefit for me, though, was the connections that I made.
That's right.
Actually, Launch Lab is how I got in a position to be on the board for Greensboro College. Because at the end of the program, they hook you up with it's like a service experts.
Yeah, that's right.
Type of, what do they call it?
Expert services, we call that.
Expert services. So they connected me with a lawyer to write out my NDA for my consulting work. Turns out she was on the board at Greensboro College.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And then they were also looking,
Yeah. Well, I guess I kind of stumbled and got stuck in the middle. So our first product is that weekend one. Our 101 camp was the 5-week camp. Mm-hmm. The one you completed is our flagship, 14 weeks. And that's a deep dive. That's a big, we are looking at your operations, your finance, your sales funnels and channels. We're looking at your digital presence, how you brand, how you market. And we're helping you sort of tear down your business and then rebuild it from scratch. And that is our big product. That's our big experience. And that's what we run here at Launch Greensboro. And it's gone really well. I happen to think what we're doing now is going to build on what the great, successes that my predecessor had. And we're going to go even further. And so we're digging into things and we're asking more from companies that come and take part. It's free for anyone in Greensboro. We did this for free. And we think it's differentiating. We think it's the kind of thing that you can come in here. And if you weren't a part of this, you're at a disadvantage. And if you are a part of this, we want you to go be a category killer in Greensboro.
Right. Well, I think I love getting meta on the podcast, but it's almost like, how you went to a really prestigious school. 90% of the value is just getting in and being in that bubble, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So it was an Ivy League school. I went to Princeton. Let me tell you the shocking things. I did learn three big buckets, I'd say, about this experience. Because, I went to public schools in Greensboro, right? I would argue I was not prepared. I got in and I was not prepared. But the advantages I saw there were, one, I saw real excellence in scholarship. I mean, students there train for academics the way I trained for athletics when I was an Olympian. And so seeing them and seeing their habits, that was incredibly informative and has, to this day, contributes to successes that I found in my career. The second part of it is your connections, at school. And that's true for any school. That's not just that school. The people, I can't tell you how many people I do business with every day. And their first contact, I went to school with this guy, or I knew this guy from school, or I chatted with this guy, right? So your connections from school. So, it doesn't matter if it's not Princeton, your connections will be huge leverage. And then the third bit of it is, I didn't appreciate this, but just having a couple of years to just be intellectually curious, right? Mm-hmm. Like just to dig into things you're interested in because you're interested. You never get that again. And I didn't realize that. I took it, that part I did take for granted. I thought, I'll find time. And that's just not the case. And I got a 4-year-old now. So there is my life is over. There's nothing. There's work and 4-year-old. And that's great. And I'm happier than I've ever been. But I have no time for the joy of just learning something because it's interesting.
It's funny because I was on a call with one of the podcast guests that's going to come in a few weeks. And I'm kind of in a weird way in that spot. And I'd never heard of anyone in this position where, all right, cool, Danny's on, where I'm teaching analytics. So I'm teaching what I know, but then I'm also working. And then I have a senior director who has 25 years of retail experience pushing me. So I'm like being pushed while also kind of taking the lessons, consolidating down to first principles, and then giving them to the students, which
that's right.
It's really fun. It doesn't feel like I am probably working 60, 70 hours a week, but this feels like play, technically I'm kind of on the clock, not really.
I'll say this. I think this is important. I think it's important for students. I think it's important for a lot of people. One, I think the concept of hustle culture for hustle culture's sake is gross. Right. That being said, there are a few periods in your life where you need to take advantage of hey, I got to spend an extraordinary number of hours being as good as I can be at this thing, at working as hard as I can. And if you don't do it, I think you'll look back in your life and go, I didn't become all I was meant to be. And if you do it, it can pay off for a long, long time. Not to be too blunt force with this, but the best example for me was I spent 10 years on the U.S. national team training, and I can count on a few hands, but you would go to a party or something, right? But it wasn't like you ever got to go out and party. It was prime years of youth from 11 to 26, all they did was train, eat, sleep, train, eat, sleep, train, eat, sleep. And you could say, well, like, those are some of the best years of your life. One, I loved it. So it wasn't wasted. But two, it was, if I hadn't put that effort in, I would not have been able to do the things I did later. And I got to coast for years after that. Once you're Olympic gold medalist, you can coast on that for a long time, not forever, unfortunately, but there are times in your life. And when you're young, in my mind, that's the best time. You don't owe your time to anybody else. So spend a couple years working really hard on something, and it will be rewarded. I'm certain of it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I hope it's true.
It's definitely true. It's definitely true. You don't know, you probably won't know like how. It'll probably pay off in some weird way, but it's definitely true.
Right. Well, I mean, it's funny because like I'm working on Saturdays, but like it's funny because it's turned into like a cadence with me where I meet with Gary Fly and his videographer, and we started filming content. To where last weekend I reached out to one of my current students, Kaylin, who's interested in forensic accounting. I just happen to know someone who's a fractional CFO who also does consulting in the fractional or the forensic accounting space. So I just brought them together and said, hey, we're going to be hanging out. I'm bringing food. And then it was kind of like networking, but then also too, I think they're going to start a podcast together.
Oh, that's cool.
Which it's funny because like I have 5 years of experience running a podcast, branding, how to set it up. And it's like, I guess I could sell that, but like, I really don't want to, like, I want that to be play. But at the same time though, it is reinforcing that network. So have you met Brandon Harris? I really need to have her on the podcast. Her company's called Fraud Broad.
I don't think I have. I don't think so.
She's
if I have,
local.
I'm sorry. If I have met you, I apologize. I'm just blanking. I've fifth meeting of the day. This is my concluding thing, podcast, but fifth meeting of the day. I'm like, oh wait, who have I seen? Who have I talked to? So I don't know if I have, but
she's local. So that she would be a good person for you to connect with. But then also too, kind of like we were talking about those networks and those bubbles. She's part of Next Gen CFO.
Oh yeah, yep.
You've heard of them, right? So it's like
yes, I have.
I think 18, 20 fractional C-suite executives. It's interesting because like Gary's in that space, and just talking to them, they don't realize like what about them is unique or is interesting or is compelling. So like just having a student talk to them and then put a mic there, like that's an interesting format, right?
yeah. And that group, that Next Gen CXO, is it right? It's like there's a multiple.
Well, two
or
separate
is that just a CFO?
So Gary is a CXO, so he does everything C-suite except for CFO, and they happen to be just CFOs. Well, I mean, I guess like that's the core theme, and then they kind of splinter off from there.
Yeah. I mean, you understand the accounting of a business, you understand the numbers of a business, and now all of a sudden, it's like you're a magician. You can see things in that business that you would never get in any other department. I mean, that one is really the one that you get full 360. And there's some other disadvantages, I think. One is that financial accounting is all, especially like forensic stuff, but it's all backwards looking. So it sometimes doesn't tell you the future. It can limit where you see the future going at times if you let it, but it's a superpower. You look at that and you can dissect a business and you can go like, this works, this doesn't work, this works. It's like a giant magic X-ray AI machine that just tells you everything about the business.
Well, they're a lot more pragmatic than I think you and I are kind of visionary dreamers.
Yeah.
You're the first one to be like, nope, this, the numbers. Which I think having that energy, the two kind of pressing against each other is valuable.
Absolutely. So, hey man, let's talk data. Let's talk data.
All right. Before we get into that, we got some. Daniel Hall is joining in. Daniel.
Hey, we got the man here with us.
And then Paula's pick. So Paula, thank you. I think you've been on the last 2 or 3 live streams in a row. So thank you so much for tuning in. But all right, so data. You were saying off air, you came up in sports in the dark ages of data.
Yeah, I mean dark ages, and it was still better than all of the 1900s. My time was really the dawn, I think, of some of that data-driven performance in athletics. And so we had very rudimentary sort of first pass of let's look at the inputs of performance, and let's look at some of the metrics that we weren't tracking for a long time, right? So the 80s, I would even argue maybe like the 80s was the dawn of training in some sense. I mean, before that, you hear stories of athletics in 60s and 70s when I talk to old Olympians, and they were just like, I'd throw my cigarette out and I'd go run for 5 miles, right? Like it was so, it was.
Was it John Daly that would smoke cigarettes and drink on the golf course?
Oh yeah, well, I think he still does. He might quit drinking, but yeah, I think he still does. But you could get away with it, right? And so the 80s was the dawn of like training. We're just going to grind. And then in the 90s, you started seeing people realize like, oh, it turns out like if we just add more hours of training a day, that actually is detrimental. You'll hit a diminishing return.
Right.
And then 2000s was the first time we started really looking at data in sports. So some of the things that we did in 2000s that was groundbreaking and made a difference for us. In 2002, the Olympics were held in Salt Lake City, Utah. So the Olympics were back in the U.S., Winter Olympics, first time since 1980. And the U.S. was very interested in making sure we had an awesome team that did really well. And so we were looking at red blood cell data and oxygen data and performance data. And what we realized was there's a lot of stuff people already knew. If you live at high altitude, your body will create more red blood cells and you will perform better. But what we realized from some of our research was that when you live at say 8,000 feet, which is where we lived in Deer Valley, Utah. If you train at 8,000 feet, that response on the body is too hard. It takes too much out of your body to train at 8,000 feet. And so what happens is you tear yourself down and then you don't catch back up before you have to start training again. And so when you're riding that line of how much you can train or how hard you can work in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, what happens is you kind of start getting this slow decline. And so we realized, okay, well, what do we do to mitigate that? You can train less. But we realized if you go even down to 5,000 feet and start training, now it was not so taxing on your body that when you go back up and sleep at 8,000 feet, you still get the red blood cell response. Your body creates more red blood cells. But when you go down, you could train harder, just enough, and not fall into that deficit. So it wasn't just train at altitude, don't train at altitude. Now it was like, oh, we're sleeping at one altitude, we're training at another. And how long will that effect last? And so we started tracking all these things. And not me, I was the athlete. And so I sort of just followed along, although I was always interested in it. But now we have the capability because you can track. I mean, there's amazing companies. So I'm in the startup world now. So I love companies like Whoop, which is a unicorn, right? It's the $8 billion company, right? You can track hundreds of data points and you can automate it. And now in the 2000s, what you had to do is you had to have a hypothesis and gather data and then test it, right? Oh, well, let's say we sleep higher and train lower. Okay, well, what do we have to be at? Now you can look at like multivariate data and you can let a machine learning model sleuth out the things that you never would come up with. Before we were limited to how many good ideas like our sports scientists would have. And now we can go, here's an ocean of training data. What do you see? And so I find that enormously exciting. I wish that I could have experienced some of it. But, when you're on that bleeding edge of performance, that's the kind of thing that's happening now. And I think that's one of the reasons why sport always pushes the envelope. Like it seems like it's going to plateau and it never does. Like we haven't reached the limits of human performance.
Yeah, that is pretty fascinating because it's an arms race, and especially because now you also have, US versus China. There's kind of the politics of which country has their act together. I thought it was interesting how I watched the basketball Olympics. It was close. I was shocked.
Right?
Yeah. Was it Somalia that they were up by like 10 or 15?
Was it Sudan? Was it Sudan?
Maybe it was Sudan. It was not a country that's like that I would have thought I would associate with basketball.
Yeah. I mean, here, fun experiments for your students and just data nerds watching this, and I presume there are quite a few data nerds that are just watching, right? Is you can start looking at other data and correlate it against things that you wouldn't expect, right? So simple, like easy mode. All right, what's like a country's GDP versus, Olympic medals or something,
Yeah.
or what's a population versus Olympic medals, or what's a population and a GDP versus Olympic medals, and you can start to see probably some correlations. I don't know well enough, but you can do really crazy stuff with like viewership of NBA and see how that correlates.
Right.
And I don't even know, like I've never run any of this data, but there's just cool stuff you could do with publicly available data sets and just tweak it and see what's out there. And who knows what you might find, but I think those things are the kind of things that, one, they're compelling. Two, if I ever have somebody come in here to my office and we're sit down and we're like, is this person interested in working with me or working on one of our companies? And they start coming up with this crazy thing that they found, even if it's not right, the fact that they started digging into it, I mean, that person stands out. And suddenly you're going, cool, if they came up with this, and they were just digging into it on their own, man, I want to put this person loose on, our new D2C energy supplement company and see what they come up with.
Yeah, it's this is making me think of right now I have a student, Dewan, that's in this class. Unfortunately, he's literally at football practice right now. I don't know why they're practicing from like 6 to 10. Like I guess they're trying to like up the game, I guess.
Yeah,
but,
man.
He reached out to me 6 months before the class started and said, "Hey, I really want to get an analytics job. What I'm going to do is I'm on the football team. I'm going to start tracking our data and then do some analysis around that." Which, yeah, it's interesting because he kept trying to be like, all right, how does this relate to business? And it's like, your portfolio doesn't have to be strictly business. It doesn't have to be, if you're a marketing analyst, all of your dashboards don't have to be, or your projects or your use cases have to be using data to drive marketing. You can actually have like a portfolio piece that's almost like a talking piece where you get to show off your personality a little bit. And then if Dewan was interviewing with you, man, you guys could bro down on some sports science and like the data behind that. Yeah. And then I'm sure you got some more stories. He's got some more stories. And then you guys can kind of like make that human connection. Because I think that when people are interviewing for analytics jobs, they get overly focused on technical data science and regression analysis, and it's off-putting, especially because if you're getting your first analytics job, you don't really know much about it.
That's right. You're still learning. That's totally right. Well, look, I was going to say, I said easy mode would be like when we're talking, take some simple correlations and look at them, right? But it gets tough because the tendency to overweight data, I saw that firsthand. I was in venture-backed startups for a while, and a lot of times data is messy and noisy, and even your best efforts at cleaning it, they're messy. You don't always know. And so I would say, like there's real value in being able to do the technical work of data analytics. If you can separate even the noise in what seems like clean data, you now are adding an element of humanity that still is irreplaceable. And there's no sign that it's not going to be replaced anytime soon from any of the stuff we see in AI and ML. And that is like, what is the essence or the truth of this thing? Because there's a lot of data too that when you start collecting it, you start seeing trends that aren't there, or you start thinking that this trend really matters and it doesn't. You forget what the fundamental essence is underlying. And so that part of it is what, one, you're better than 90% of people when you just do the extra work and you just dig in. But what gets you from 90% to like 99 is you not only can do all that work, you can not only come up with these interesting trends and concepts and realizations, but you can figure out like what's the truth of the matter and what all this other stuff doesn't. Right. You can go, hey, 80% of this doesn't matter. And in the startup world, that's the case. 80% of the data, 90% of the data doesn't matter because it's not actually helpful. But there's a few points you gotta nail them.
Right. Well, I think two terms are coming to mind. So, number one, judgment. It sounds like that's the secret sauce, because the second point that kind of came to mind is judgment and risk mitigation. Because I feel like most people who are working as a full-time job, they don't really have founder's mentality. Like they're in their little silo, and it's like, all right, well, if I just crank this widget and I do this right and it's perfect, I've done my job, I've done my piece. But like running your own business, you can put together the best widget or, the best cell phone out there in the world. And if it could be that, the economy's down, or it could be that there's a new technology that made you. So there's so much risk that just exists at all times. But being an employee, you're kind of shielded from that. So like just having a little bit more judgment than everybody else on your team really helps you build that, strengthen that relationship with your manager, I would say.
For sure. I was thinking about, before we talked, you were asking, when you asked me to come on this, we were talking about like what traits are important for hiring. Right. And again, I got to say, hard work will get you past almost everybody. Like there's a reason why everyone says, I can't hire people and I need them and I can't find them. And also there's a lot of people like, I can't get a job, right? Like these two things can exist at the same time, but they do, because employers would love a certain level of effort and impact and output. And there's a lot of people, frankly, you just haven't worked that hard. They don't really they haven't done a 90-hour week or 60 or 70, 80-hour week. Now, again, I'm not saying this is a way to live life. I'm saying try it a few times in your life. Right. And so there's that impotence mismatch. And I think that is something that explains a little bit of like why people say, oh, we can't hire anybody. And then why people are like, I can't get a job. And so one, just working hard will get you there. But rock stars, the ones who go above and beyond, I can think of a person who was at launch even before my time. And she was so good. She left behind the standard by which we now present to people coming in. And she did it on her own. She was like, here's your job. This is what we need from you. And she goes, not only did I do this thing, I thought about what else we might need. And I've added these other pieces. Is this okay? Does this work? Right? She didn't even do it in a bubble. And now we hold that up as the gold standard. And we go, look, this is what excellence looks like. This is what we want you to get to. Interestingly, we haven't had anybody do it. So I don't know. We haven't cracked the code on, holding up her example of excellence has not helped us, encourage better performance, or maybe it has, but we haven't reached that level again.
Right. Because it sounds like it's not a static thing. It's a fluid thing. Yeah. It's not that you got this number right this one time. It's more of your overall approach is different. And I don't even know, how would you, I guess you could ask a behavioral question in an interview. Like how do you, well, I guess two things. So how do you ask or kind of feel that out during the hiring process, or, when you're working, how do you kind of measure who the heavy hitters are? Yeah. And then also too, how can one signal that if they, feel like they are that? Yeah.
Well, what's that old saying? I'm going to butcher this. It's like, who you are shines so bright, I can't hear what you say, or something like that. Right. I know I'm just absolutely massacring that. But one thing pre-hire, one thing we notice right away, and this is a screen for us. If we hear back from candidates right away, and I don't mean if we email you, we will never email you at 10, but if we email you and you get back to us the same day, if it's reasonable, or first thing the next day, if we hear back from you right away, automatically that's a great indicator. And if we don't hear back from you, you're cut right away. And again, I'm not saying if we email you at 5 p.m. on a Friday and it's a holiday weekend, I'm not saying you've got to email over the weekend, but if you do, you'll stand out. I'm saying if we email you on Monday morning and I don't hear from you till, Thursday afternoon, that indicates what you're, and that's base. That's not that's necessary, but not sufficient. When interviewing, we will have questions that are essentially testing whether you're technically proficient, right? And cool, can you actually do the things you say you can? And if not, can you tell us how you might approach it? I care even less about technical proficiency in a specific thing than I care about how do you think about this problem? How would you try and solve it? What tools have you used that look similar? And when I hear that sort of rational problem solving, Okay, great. Now we're finally like you're in the zone where we want to hire you, and we're thinking about it. And now what differentiates is probably that human connection we were talking about. Like, what are you interested in? We have to work with you 50 hours a week. What we want to make sure that we enjoy this experience and that our visions are aligned. Like what we're doing, if you don't like and are not interested in what we're doing, you should definitely go find something you are. And that's not threatening. It's like your life is better if you go find something you really love doing. If you don't love startup life, which is what we do at launch, it's chaotic and we don't know what we're going to be working on the same thing every day. If you like need rigor and I need to get up and do this exactly the same every day, where like you won't be happy here and we probably won't get great results.
Yeah. So it sounds like almost like being game or being enthusiastic is step one.
Yeah. And just being reliable. I mean, we rely on the people we work with. And so if you can't even respond to us and you want us to pay you, like, you know, I don't trust that you're going to be there when we need you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you ever read the book Charisma Myth?
What is it?
Charisma Myth?
I haven't.
Okay.
Like I said, I got a 4-year-old and I'm trying to, we're trying to build venture backable startups. So
it was
my reading is behind.
It was written by like a therapist or psychologist. And she basically broke down charisma into like an equation, which is charisma is equal to warmth plus status or power. So like in an interview, if you want to be charismatic, number one, show that you want to do this job and you want to be there and you're interested in the industry or the team or whatever. But then also back it up with, oh yeah, well, I worked in a similar industry and this is what I did. And this is how the problem I solved. I'm realizing that's what I did this year. So I interviewed with 5 different companies and I was a little perplexed because not one of them asked to see a portfolio from me. And it's funny because I actually asked my manager, like, hey, what if I was just lying? Like I could have just been just lying through my teeth the whole time. He's like, yeah, but I've kind of got a bullshit detector. I can, I guess you can ask like probing questions to like, or clarifying questions to like, maybe on the surface it sounds good, but you ask why once or why twice, and then it just crumbles and it's just made of sand.
You know what? That's a great point. Actually, and it ties back into the unintentional point I made, which is when I said no one cares about your grades. However, if you get straight A's, I know that you can do the work, right? And so no one cares, but they still matter. And the excuse, and like totally guilty of this in high school with a lot of classes that I shouldn't have because I was a good student, but I was like, ugh, it doesn't matter. Like this doesn't matter, whatever I did in this sophomore class. You're right. It cosmically, existentially doesn't matter, but actually doing the work, showing up, knowing your stuff reflects in your grade. You'll get good grades if you do the work, and it does matter, right? So circular and it's so unhelpful. You said it doesn't matter. You say it does matter. What I mean is the act of getting good grades matters, but no one's going to look at your grades.
Well, how about this? What if I throw this term out there? Conscientiousness.
Sure.
I would say good grades. Well, it's funny because like now I was going to say good grades signal conscientiousness, which I would say is important. But I too was like a very bad student. It's the ultimate irony that they let me teach. I mean, I did pretty poor in high school. I did just well enough to potentially go to grad school in undergrad. But that being said, I played in bands. I had a very thriving social life. I went to parties. I learned how to socialize, which it's interesting because that actually helps you learn how to sell.
Yeah.
Like how to be a good hang or just like fun to be around. People, I mean, it depends on what you're selling, of course, but like if you're jovial and people seek you out and want to spend time with you, that's a huge benefit right there. And I think that a lot of analysts they're pretty much blind to that point of, it's almost like would I have a beer with this guy test?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, to the question about your portfolio, and when you're talking about, 5 interviews, no one has to see a portfolio, but you also have 250 episodes. Like, you have earned a living, you've built a business, and you have earned a living. And so you've demonstrated enough that in a lot of respects to the bullshit meter that your boss had, and it was like, I can tell you bullshit, right? Like, there is an authority that you cannot fake unless you are a sociopath. And if you're a sociopath, that's a very different set of problems and things not worth getting into. And so to whether or not grades matter or don't matter, doing the work, not getting good grades because you don't do the work or because you have you learn differently. Those are two very different scenarios, and you can still build a very successful and impactful career without having good grades. If you're just messing around and you've just messed around all through school and all through college, you might have made it, but you also have this other thing. Like, look, I also can demonstrate that I've done it by years of excellence and years of expertise. And so that overweighs any kind of grades. But if all you have to judge, because you're just coming out of college, is grades, you still got to go with like, well, I only got one data point. I'm going to go with the data point I have.
Yeah, because I feel like me not being asked to see a portfolio, I'm in a different, I'm 8 years into this career, I have an MBA, I've run a business. Also, too, like, I'm actively being recruited for jobs. So that's a completely different power dynamic. But if you're coming out of college, number one, I think you should get some type of internship, even if it's unpaid, like where you can say, hey, I did this thing with the business and here's what I learned about XYZ industry, maybe marketing or sales or whatever, where because there's a lot. And actually, this is kind of interesting. You went to an Ivy League school and you said it was very rigorous. How much was it theoretical versus practical?
Well,
before you start, I have an assumption. What I've heard is that it's almost low status in these higher education institutions if what you're doing has a practical application. Like, they want to do math for the theory of math, and that's like studying fractals, and it's like, well, I'm,
I would say that last bit is people wanting to wanting to paint Ivy League in a way that I didn't find it to be.
Okay.
I'll say this: it was though extraordinarily theoretical. I would not say it is theoretical because of a status thing. It is because construction of models. You said first principles earlier.
Yeah.
The idea that you can construct models to understand the reality of a situation, be it mathematics, be it financial engineering, which was our big, financial engineering at Princeton is the on-ramp to Wall Street. So 55% of graduates from Princeton go to Wall Street. And so it is rigorous. In fact, it's much harder than the things that you will encounter in day-to-day work life. So in that sense, that's why I think it's disconnected. However, I was an economist. I don't know if Daniel Hall, I studied economics. I don't know if Daniel Hall is still on. We've joked and talked about this before. And so I think you'll get a kick out of this. Me studying economics at Princeton, I had to spend years unlearning those lessons. And it was, I would say, actively detrimental to me becoming a good business person. The study of economics is orthogonal to success in business, in startup business, not necessarily other kinds of business. The reason for that is economics is entirely descriptive. In my experience, if you base all of your projections on history, you are not taking into account that things change over the future. You might hand wave at it, but in reality, they don't. This is how it's always been. And the big joke with economists is this. You got two economists walking down the street, and economists love rational market, rational theory.
Yeah.
And I did some behavioral economics where they're starting to change that. But two economists walking down the street. One of them looks down and sees $1 and says, hey, look, there's $1 on the ground. And the other economist looks at it and goes, can't be, because if there was, someone would have picked it up by now.
Interesting.
And that's the essence of what I learned in economics is rational markets. They're always rational because if it wasn't. Now that was my experience. That does not mean that actually, a lot of Princeton economists are not going to say that, are not going to be that obtuse. That's just being, hyperbolic to prove a point. But then I went to startup life, and I wanted to create this perfect model of, okay, here's how we're going to build a sales channel, and here's how we're going to go and like get in front of customers, and we're going to create the perfect thing, and the perfect thing will shine so bright that everyone will come to buy it. That is just boneheadedly wrong. It is bare knuckle boxing trying to start a business, and we haven't gotten to it, but I think we should. For most founders, you are just keeping your head above water, and the work that your analysts can do can give insights that most founders will never be able to take the time, because I got to make this next sale, or, oh, I just sold this big thing. I have to deliver this product. I got to stay up till midnight. I don't have time to go look at my last month's sales data and find trends, because I have to get this thing shipped. Oh, I got to send these 40 emails. I got to take this next meeting. So they're too busy to do the important work that will have an ROI.
Yeah, I guess the comment I made about like theoretical being higher status is that, and maybe this is just ignorance on my part, how can you study something academically and then also put it up against the real world? Because like, aren't you in that ivory tower? Like, aren't you removed from like that point on economics? It's like, I don't know. Brett Weinstein has been making the rounds on like the podcast. I don't know if you know, he's like a theoretical physicist, and he just bores me to death because it's so, but like everybody is so interested. He has a cohesive theory for everything. And it's like, oh, I just don't care. Because like
it's alluring.
But it's like a weird status intellectual, like I can think in abstractions down to the 5th degree or something like that. And it's I don't know.
A lot of it sort of becomes, forgive me if this is crass, it sort of becomes like I was gonna say intellectual masturbation kind of.
Yeah.
It's like fun to be smart and to think of smart things. A lot of economists are broke, like and there's some, and there are some that are absolutely phenomenally wealthy. Like there are some hedge fund guys who are economists who realize all kinds of crazy things, that like when the weather in Argentina is this, the price of orange juice pulp is this, and they have made billions and tens of billions. So I'm not saying all economists are like this, but there are a lot who are, and there are a lot who are selling books, and there's a lot of merit in it. I'm not going to just dismiss the whole study of it, because you still need it for things like monetary theory. And it's been great. Like the Fed works for us, right? Like it's not always been fun, but we've had a lot of growth for a long time. And we've had a couple of recessions, but we didn't have a depression. We haven't had like famine. Like a lot of things are working really well that have not been the case in mankind's history. It's like 50 years of this. And so we think, the tiniest blip is unfortunate. When you look back in all of history, it's like, oh, it used to be just, a third of the population is dead, right? So life has been really sweet. A lot of economics works. Too much economics, it makes you think the world is more perfect than it really is, or more mathematical. Well, maybe so mathematical, more simple than it is. And then you get in trouble.
What is it? They assume all things held.
Yeah, all things held up. Yeah, that you hear that every class. All other things equal.
Or like this thing exists in a vacuum. And it's like, that's not how it works.
Yeah. Well, okay. So part of the problem with that, and again, this is the one defense, because I did not go to graduate level economics. Part of the defense of that is they go, because in 4 years we're just giving you really simple things. We know this isn't reality, but when you get to grad school, you'll start doing massive, multivariate regression analysis, where we're going to be looking at all of the inputs. Some of this, as you move forward along the spectrum of difficulty, you start to run into machine learning, though, right? So you do a simple regression analysis or correlation of a couple variables, and you'll see like a little trend. Most business, that's all you need. And that's why I said, in some ways, the work of real life is a lot simpler. So you do the hard work of building models in university, but you keep going. And you keep adding more variables, and you keep adding time series variables, and you say, what are the changes over time? What are the changes over multiple variables? And suddenly you start to get to machine learning. You start getting models that do incredible things. So deep statistical analysis. That's so far beyond my horsepower and capability. And I realized that. And I got there, I was like, oh, these people are really smart. They should keep pushing that envelope. I am going to go out and I'm going to try and be the best business creator I can be.
Yeah. Well, see, what's interesting about being a category analyst for a grocery store is that I get to see economics play out in the real world. So like I'm looking at inflation reports. I'm looking at like, oh, there's a strike that might happen in New Jersey. What effect is that going to have on our supply chain? So should we source our peaches from Georgia or, somewhere else? Like it's so satisfying and scratching that itch from that, like, because I got my undergrad in economics. So like understanding the theory and then seeing it play out in real life. And then also what is oddly enjoyable to me is seeing the like practicality of the people who are actually running that business. Yeah. Because there's some people who just like geek out and they like get hyper fixated like you would in an academic setting. And it's like, get it together, nerd. There's other things to do, like you can't, and this happens all the time in analytics and data science worlds where this guy gets fixated on this problem and he spends 100 hours, 200 hours, a month of time, and it moves the needle this much as far as profitability goes. So there's like that, and it kind of circles back around to judgment of like, are you actually interested in driving the business forward, or are you just interested in intellectually masturbating all the time?
Exactly right. And the thing I love about business is actually the same thing I love about sports. And that is, if you aren't good, you get flushed out.
Yeah.
Like to your point about the people at Fresh Market, if they aren't good and they mess up and they go, oh, we're going to go get our supply of oranges from whatever, because we see this trend that we think is happening, and they're wrong. There's no oranges. And people are like, where are my oranges? I'm going to Lidl across the street, or Lidl or whatever it is, right? Like you can't be wrong very much in business, or you go out of business. And two, you really can't wait too long or you go out of business. And that's the big difference that I didn't get. I got soft at school because you get to tinker and you think and you whatever. And again, I'm not knocking school. That part was really essential for providing the skills that I can apply later on. But you need to move fast in startup world, especially, but in business, the more agile you are, the better you can test concepts and move the needle and get things done. And so if you are spending 200 hours on something, but the marginal return on it's going to be tiny, then that's 200 hours you didn't spend on like finding the next killer product or getting the next thing in front of customers or finding a way to lower prices somewhere else. So that there's a real cost to spending that time doing things. For your analysts, the things that super matter, if you're just tinkering with data and you're like just following this curiosity, like it's the tough balance, and this is not great advice, but sometimes you don't follow things you're interested in. But if you're not providing real results, real value to a business, like they just can't afford to keep you on forever.
Well, was it Mark Zuckerberg who said it's like an 80-20 thing, or maybe it's a 95-5, where we want our people working 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time they just daydream and they get to take naps and they get to have fun, or they get to actually pour all of their energy into something that they're hyper fixated on. I guess that's what is off-putting to me about maybe not the Ivy League, but just like the concept of higher education in general. Of it is such a privileged position to be in that you're so insulated that what you're doing doesn't have a practical or direct practical application.
Yeah.
And then, what I'm laughing about is a few years ago I dated a girl who was this is so funny, getting a master's degree in poetry, and it was funny going to like her cocktail parties with her friends because they all kind of came off as like really insecure. And it's like, it makes sense because like you sit there and you just like pontificate, and I don't know, I brought up Ernest Hemingway, which apparently is lowbrow,
Hemingway lowbrow? Oh, that's wrong. Hemingway is the best. He is great.
Well, I was talking about like how I was reading and I was like, he was describing how this guy went to war and he had just this one focus. And I was like, I wish I had that. I'm too scattered right now. And he's like, well, my dad was like Hemingway. He was hyper masculine and blah, 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 blah. And it was like this weird, like, I don't know. I was like a bull in a china shop there. Like I had no idea.
Well, I'll say, fortunately, it's a big world, right? There's enough space for people who are huge literary, comparative literature analysis. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad's really intellectual, and you know, I love pop, but didn't make a fortune, right? Like, didn't make a fortune. Yeah. I also haven't really made my fortune. Like, I've definitely not accomplished my goals in business and finance yet. But like, there's an unhealthy, I think, opportunity when you are really smart, and you've got to be really smart to be able to think that piercingly about things. It still is a horsepower thing, but it can be crippling because you don't always realize, like, it doesn't really matter that much. Like, yes, you are that smart, and yes, you can really delve into something. That's cool. There's a lot of value, but there are going to be people who are richer who are selling plumbing supplies. Like, and being wealthy, I do not. There's so much more that matters, but being wealthy affords the ability to change a lot of things, and it's a lot of power, and that's just the reality of the world. It's maybe not good or bad or whatever. It just is, and there's a lot of folks who are like, wait, I'm so smart. Why don't I have more influence? And you're like, I know, I hate it, but the world actually didn't like that. But we're delving pretty far into opinions.
I was about to say, we've been chatting for an hour, and we haven't even brought Danny in. Danny, are you ready? Can you turn your camera on, or is your camera not working? I think he said it was like kind of spotty. So, Danny, let's go ahead and pull you in. There we go. Danny.
Yeah. I'm not sitting in an office with a polo. I got off work, but
yeah, well, you actually, it's very topical. You actually, small world. So, my mother has recently started doing like boxing. Mm-hmm. He's training her, or he was.
I haven't seen her in a long time.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, she broke her collarbone when we were in DC, but that's like a whole nother story.
Hopefully not boxing you.
No,
we were on scooters.
Far in those classes.
But so Danny, you've got a kind of an interesting background because you said you worked for the Army doing IT, right? And like a very specific thing. First of all, you downplay yourself. You're like, I did this thing that was very specific. But why don't you kind of like pitch Joey, like answer the question, tell me about yourself.
Well, yeah, well, first off, I joined the Army to be infantry. Stuff happened, and I got mandatory reclass to be a 25 Bravo, which is an IT specialist. And a lot of IT specialists, they will go into a section where if something goes wrong with their computer, the general's computer ain't working, it's your job to go over there and fix it. I was never put in one of those sections. So I was in a section where we drive out to a site, set up the satellite, and I was on the computer end, making sure everything was connected in that way. And then in my later job, if somebody's field, the tools they used when they went out to the field, if those weren't working, we would go to their company and find out what the problem was. So I have a minor understanding of IPs and how they all relate and stuff, but I'm not deep into it. I never got that opportunity. Like, I got out technically as an E4, a corporal, and most of the higher end stuff that's going to the E5s, E6, E7s.
Paula says, thank you for your service.
Oh, appreciate it. Still don't know how to respond to that, but thank you.
But okay, I guess this is a bit of a side tangent in that, Danny, I think you need to like talk about yourself in a brighter light, maybe. Joey, what are your thoughts on that?
So, sorry, say that you broke up a little bit. Is it me or you?
I think it's me.
Yeah,
I can see my internet. Can you hear me now?
I can. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So what was the question there, John David?
Okay, so the question is, I think, Danny, you need to talk about yourself in a brighter light. And I think the fear is that you don't want to come off as bullshitting. And I get that, but like, you got to sell yourself. I think that's like part of the game, right? Of interviewing. Like my manager even said that in the interviews, like, all right, I see your resume. Everyone fluffs their resume. What have you really done? So it's like kind of built into that dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I struggle with even in like my professional personal training. If I could like go out and pitch to random people, I would have a lot more clients and I would make a lot more money. But at the same time, to me, a lot of it's like being a car salesman. And for me personally, when somebody is giving me that treatment, I can tell real well. So I don't want to give anybody that treatment because I know, like, I just assume they can see through it.
Yeah. Oh man, you and we could talk because there's a name for that feeling. It's called sales reluctance. So I took a quiz. I was in the company I founded, my last shop. I took a quiz because I was doing a lot of selling, and I had like, this is a couple of years ago. This is really, really extreme anxiety. Like I was like, yeah. Look, it is here. Here's what it is. My first company I tried to start, my pitches would go like this. This might make it one day. I mean, dumber ideas have. Not great sales. And so it was super challenging because I feel the exact same way. Like I can't stand the gross, smarmy, like, let me tell you how great I am, blah, 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 blah. And I'll tell you what turned for me, because all of a sudden, sales has actually become like probably one of my strongest aspects is I found if I don't believe in the thing I'm doing, I just don't do it.
Yeah.
And if I believe in it, I can really sell. And if I'm doing it for somebody else, I can sell ice to Eskimos.
Yeah.
It turns out I don't like selling for myself very much, which is challenging if you want to have your own business. But I love selling for other people. And that mental switch of turning and being like, wait, this person is providing great value. I need this person to be successful in life because I want that person to be successful. Let me connect them with the right person. Let me put them in front of the right audience. Let me help hype up whatever it is they're doing. And it was world changing to me. But I think, I mean, if you were interviewing with me, I would just love to ask about stories, deploying IT. I don't know. The U.S. Army has got to be one of the biggest IT infrastructure entities in the entire universe, right? I mean, they're planet scale, the logistics of it all. So, I mean, I'd probably ask about that. And I'm sure that you've had either deployments, personally being deployed, or deployments of technology that are just mind-boggling.
Yeah. I mean, the funny part is, like, I spent my first year in Korea, and nobody, at least when I was nobody in Korea gets deployed. So that's all I wanted. I wanted to be deployed. And then when I went to Bragg, which it used to be Fort Bragg, sorry.
No worries.
When I went to Fort Bragg, I got put in a non-deployable unit. We were a support battalion. So it just never happened for me.
Yeah. Well, I guess by deploy, I mean, there's like you're deploying tech or you're updating tech or whatever. So, I mean, being able to speak to the architecture and the scale of that infrastructure, I mean, I'd be fascinated to hear about it because I don't know what your particular skill set is, but those are massive mission critical networks that you're working with. Even when you're not deployed and you're still like at home, you got to keep how many people are at Fort Bragg? Or is it not called Fort Bragg anymore?
No, I think Fort, it's something Liberty, I think. I don't know.
So I mean, I don't know how many soldiers are stationed there, but you got to keep that thing running. I mean, that's the heartbeat of U.S. military installation at Fort Bragg. How many people come out of that? So, I get it. You don't have to sound salesy to talk about some incredible experience you've had or the scale of the tech that you are working with. And even if you were just a small slice of it, it's still a necessary, essential piece to keeping American armed forces running. So that's not you hyping yourself up. That's just the truth of what you're doing.
I mean, I do definitely agree with what you said about when you believe in something, you can sell it better, because I kind of relate that to like my job. When I'm like heading a class, like I can stand in front of, like, if I'm teaching like a silver sneakers class, which is a class for older people, I can stand in front of 25, 30 people because I know what I'm doing, and I can charismatic. I can get everybody smiling and happy. But if I'm forced to stand up in front of a class and give a presentation on something I do not know, It is the most important thing, and it is a struggle.
Yeah.
So someone didn't do their homework, so I actually pulled them to the front of the class to go work on Power BI.
Hey, I got decently far before I struggled.
But actually, so on the point of sales, Joey, I actually recently pitched you an idea.
Yeah, great idea too.
Maybe we could kind of unpack that from your perspective.
Yeah,
Like,
let's
how did I
do
approach
it.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. And then I unfortunately do have to stop
Right.
pretty quick because I got to get home and get my kid to bed.
That's true. You have a kid.
Yeah, that's right, man. Most important thing in my life. So I don't know how much of this we're even quite public with. I've started floating the idea. So you've got these great students. You've got these really bright people who are doing deep analytics work. And the thing that I'm finding over and over again, it's not just at startups, even up to multiple million and tens of millions of dollars of companies, tens of millions of dollars in revenue companies. You're not big enough to have a dedicated analytics team, and there are big inefficiencies that are just not being figured out. And so you were saying, look, this is what we've had success with. I've been able to place some of my students as interns, sort of working hand in glove with you, John David, and we are able to make measurable impact on that company. And then that student is able to take that success and then have something when they go to that interview, they go, look, this is a result I've done. It's not just theoretical. It's not just class homework. I have made this impact on this company, and this is ways I might be able to have an impact on yours. And so we were thinking, well, people need this, and companies, everyone needs people who are trained in this. And every business owner I know of a small, medium-sized business doesn't have time to get it done and doesn't have the expertise on staff. And so we started thinking about, you sort of pitch, well, can we take this thing and scale it? Sorry, I've got a absolutely massive train going behind me. I don't know if you're picking it up. But you said, let's see if we can take this thing and scale it up. And our entrepreneurship program in Greensboro is run by our Chamber of Commerce. I'm an employee I'm an EVP of the Chamber of Commerce, and we have 1,400 member businesses. Those businesses, one deployment of one business analyst can 5x or 10x or maybe 100x the cost of employing that person. And so we were like, great, let's do a partnership with Launch Greensboro and your company and see if we can't start helping the businesses in the Greensboro Chamber find some of these inefficiencies. And those analysts would get paid, and your company would get paid, and those companies would benefit by having, again, hopefully transformational data realizations. And I actually have one anecdote, and then I'm going to scoot.
Yeah.
So we're running our launch program right now, and we have our entrepreneurs come in, and the big difference between when you were running it is now we require all the entrepreneurs to set a goal of building a growth plan, so a strategic plan to get to $1 million per year in revenue in 24 to 36 months based on where they are. So all of our companies are trying to become $1 million revenue companies in the next 2 to 3 years. And they're low six-figure companies, most of them. And so we had an entrepreneur in here, and we were looking, and we were doing really simple stuff. Any of your students could have done this.
Yeah.
We were looking at sales data, and he sells wholesale. So he sells wholesale to stores, and he has a very specific niche, and he sells into a specific sport, and it's an energy product, and he sells into this specific store. And he sold into a couple of supplement companies. And we were looking at sales data, and I was like, whoa, what's that one right there? And he goes, oh, that's a supplement company. And so it turns out the people who he thought were his audience, and this product is entirely geared to this one specific subset of athletes, they were not buying from the stores that they shop at. But this thing was selling 13x the amount in supplement stores that he was selling in the stores that were specific to the sport. So even though this product was specifically for people in a sport, even though his marketing is specifically geared towards them, just by moving it to supplement stores. And he has changed his whole strategy now because he has a map. How many companies am I going to call a day? How many people am I going to land? And we have a funnel. It's about 30%. He'll land about 30% of the cold calls that he gets to talk to on the phone. And so we go, well, if you spend that same time working here on these other kinds of companies and the other kinds of stores, what difference is going to make in your business? And he had this data, and he was sort of even aware of it, but sometimes takes an outside mind to look at the same data, do a little bit of analysis and a little bit of projection and go, hey, if you just sell to these people instead of these people, you'll 4x your revenue. And He started doing it, and we're going to see. I mean, it's been days, and already he's changed his whole strategy. And it could be the difference between his company doing 6 figures and doing 100K or 500K in a year.
Danny, what do we talk about on Wednesday?
In which part?
What did I write up on the board first thing?
Oh, you're putting him on the spot. I'm putting him on the spot.
You still there? Did you cut out? No.
Can y'all hear me?
I can hear you now. Are you stalling because you can't remember?
Can y'all hear me now?
Sorry,
No, yeah. I'll be honest, I don't know, but my wife just called, and apparently if somebody calls you, it messes it up.
Gotcha. No worries. So, Joey, the first thing I wrote on the board yesterday was sales. And I was like, literally,
Oh, yeah.
you could have taught the class that I taught with that one story of like, you could study this to what's the decision, who he targets.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
All right. Joey, I'll let you go.
Gentlemen,
Thank you
great
so
to see
much.
you.
Yep.
Danny, good to meet you, buddy. I hope I get to meet you in person.
Oh, yes, sir.
Danny,
Yeah,
thanks
I appreciate you coming on. I've been to about 3 of these meetings, and I gotta say, this was by far one of the best ones I've seen.
Thank you, man. I've loved it. Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Yep.
Have
Bye.
a good night, everyone.